So Sanseito is representing that disaffection and increasingly learning from the populist playbook of Donald Trump to try and appeal to younger voters who had turned off politics.
A growing number of people in Japan are being swayed into supporting the far-right Sanseito party by its charismatic leader Sohai Kamya. He took the party from being a fringe opposition with just one seat, emerging as one of the biggest winners of Japan's last election with 14 seats. The tagline of the party is Japanese First, and there is a mission to tackle mass migration, which has obvious echoes of Reform UK and Donald Trump's MAGA movement. So how much of the rise of this party has been inspired by the populist parties of the West? Well, with me now to help me understand all that is the Professor of Modern Japanese Politics and International Relations at Cambridge University, Dr. John Nilsson-Wright. John, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks very much for being with us. So look, in my sort of limited understanding, I thought the politics of Japan had pretty much always been sort of Japanese first. What's changed?
Well, I think it's this kind of populist dimension. For the best part of 70 years, we've had really one party in power, the Liberal Democratic Party, which has been a little bit like the British Conservative Party, remarkably pragmatic, adaptive, very good at winning elections, a broad coalition of interests. But recently, four factors have complicated life for the LDP. One has been political corruption, scandals within the LDP that have made it seem to the general public too interested in its own financial interests. Two, price inflation. The yen has been low. Japan is now experiencing about 3% inflation, which may not seem very high, but for a country like Japan, which has had about 3 decades of relative economic stagnation, that's kind of significant. And then a very symbolic increase, doubling in the price of rice, which for the Japanese is very emblematic of their national identity. And then the fourth factor, Donald Trump himself and his much more transactional approach towards allies. And Japan, of course, has relied heavily on the United States. So in the face of that pressure and all of those other problems, the LDP is now finding it very hard to convince the public that it knows how to govern. And under their current prime minister, Mr. Ishiba, they've lost 3 elections in a row. The last election, when Sanseito, the party you mentioned, broke through with that dramatic success in securing 14 seats in the upper house of the Japanese parliament, is really a pivotal moment. And the LDP finds itself a minority government in both houses of the Japanese parliament, finding it very difficult to govern. And now, on top of that, Prime Minister Ishiba has announced on the back of those defeats that he's going to step down. So there will be an election within the LDP. So Sanseito is representing that disaffection and increasingly learning from the populist playbook of Donald Trump to try and appeal to younger voters who had turned off politics.
Sure. So how important is immigration to all of this? Because, I mean, by Western context, immigration in Japan is tiny, but it is growing.
Immigration is hugely important, and the principal reason is that demographically, Japan has a rapidly aging population. Its population is shrinking overall. At the moment, it's about 127 million. The projection is by 2050 it'll be down to 90 million, and it needs workers. It needs migrants, and at the same time, it's a country that hasn't really embraced open immigration at any point in its history, certainly not in the post-war period. And Sanseito is exploiting that sense of anxiety regarding the need to increase the number of foreigners to play this very nationalistic card, engaging in fake news, the same sort of social media-driven campaigns to stoke up fear, exploiting the tension between dealing with that demographic deficit, dealing with the economic problems, and at the same time exploiting the anxieties of a Japanese public that's not used to having foreigners in their midst.
Tell us about the founder of Sanseito, Sohei Kamya, if I'm saying his name correctly. What should we know about him?
Kamya is a local former Liberal Democratic Party politician. He's relatively young. He's got a reputation of being a bit of a provocateur. He's said some pretty striking things in public, quite a few anti-Semitic remarks. He, I think, is a shrewd political operator. He knows that there is this sense of an electorate feels disengaged, disillusioned with mainstream politics. And he is running a pretty effective campaign to try and present himself and the people around him in his party that include actually a surprising large number of young people, women, candidates, to challenge Japan's traditional taboo subjects, one of which is the question of immigration, coming out and being very forceful in criticizing migrants. Also on issues to do with nationalism. The party has at its heart a commitment to the emperor system. It's very explicit in saying it wants to limit foreign intervention in Japan, not just migrants, but foreign investment, for example. And that poses another problem, of course, because Japan has a huge budget deficit, one of the highest in the advanced industrialized world, and it needs, therefore, foreign resources. So you can understand the problem for the government, but you can also see why the party under Kamya's leadership is trying to exploit these opportunities.
And look, finally, John, is this interesting because it's a new phenomenon in Japan, or is this interesting because it's a harbinger of the future, that although this party remains relatively small, it really could grow? Which way should we be thinking about this?
It's hard to say at this point. I think there is the potential for it to grow. And the reason for that is that disaffection with the LDP is so strong. A lot will depend on who the LDP picks as its new leader. That election will take place on October 4th. One of the front runners is a woman called Takaichi Sanai. She's seen as a bit of a conservative hawk, a nationalist in her own right. And for some in the LDP, there's the hope that if they pick her, they will inoculate the party against this populist rise. Alternatively, they might opt for Koizumi Shinjiro, the youngest candidate at 44, the son of a former prime minister. He's a liberal, and he's trying to walk this fine line between both capitalizing on his youth to exploit the interests on the part of young voters who feel disaffected with the old mainstream, and at the same time reassure the foreign investment market and business community within Japan that he's not going to radically change the direction of the country. So it will be a very interesting election to look at.
We know he's inspired by Donald Trump. Can we say that he's inspired by Nigel Farage as well? Has he noticed Nigel Farage?
There's not much evidence to suggest that reform has any traction in Japan. Donald Trump, definitely. The sort of make Japan great again motif is now starting to get some traction in Japan. And that's partly because, of course, the US-Japan relationship is historically very, very important. Sure. Relationship over time.
I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. That is Dr. John Nilsson-Wright, a professor of Japanese politics and international relations at the Centre at the University of Cambridge. Thank you, John. Great to speak to you.